Welcome everyone to the Northern Heartland Symposium Heart of the Matter. Today I'm joined by Stephen Pritchard and David Napthine. And we've all been working with various different types of community which some describe within policy circles as hard to reach. That in itself is slightly problematic. I know Stephen will have problems with that terminology. David, I imagine you might find it problematic too. So let's get the problematic out of the way first.
In academia, there's a term co-identifying, that you have this identification with the place that you've grown up or the place that you work. It's very much that actually you are as one with the land that you farm.
I'm going to be talking about my work in essentially the Northern Heartlands project, covering the kind of western half of County Durham. If we have to identify types of community that we were focusing on, there was two types really. Those who are living in remote upland areas and are basically whose livings are within the agricultural and stone sectors, and then those living in former pit villages, who are culturally quite distinct actually. Each of those types of community have their own issues with authority, shall we say, which perhaps therefore makes them hard to reach. Now, I think I can encapsulate this issue in, because I actually, as well as working with farmers, I did work with one pit village, Evenwood, and they were telling me there was a cautionary tale really of how quite a well-known NGO was going to be bringing some funding to the village and set up a big village meeting in the town hall, and talked about deprived communities, and in that moment lost the whole room, lost the whole village. The project didn't go ahead. So perhaps we could start on this idea that it's okay to label. Stephen, do you want to kick off as to how you feel about the idea of the hard to reach and how it plays out in policy thinking?
I think hard to reach, difficult to reach, low cultural engagement, these sorts of words, these sort of terms are prevalent, highly prevalent, and have been quite a long time within arts and culture, and that they are deeply problematic. And put simply, if you need to reach out or do outreach work into a community, or engage with a community, from my perspective, that automatically suggests that you must not be part of that community. And therefore, this idea that we need to reach these difficult to reach, there's something really, there's a missionary zeal about that, a real sense of like cultural missionaries, the great and the good coming to this low culture area to give it culture, to bring art, and with that health, well-being, and all the rest of these things that are supposed to come with it, if you take part in these prescribed activities. And I think that is really, really problematic, because it suggests that these places have no culture. It suggests that therefore it's only a step to saying they're uncultured, and it's only a step to saying therefore that they're uncivilized. And when they talk about deprived, then there's a close association between, in some people's minds, between a deprived community and being an uncultured community, often working class, and maybe from different ethnic and cultural backgrounds and all the rest of it. But that's not true. And that ultimately, in every community, everywhere, there are many, many cultures and many, many activities and many, many forms of everyday life going on that are really creative, really, really strong, bringing about really strong community bonds, yet these are not considered to be worth anything by policymakers, by arts institutions, many arts institutions anyway, and many policymakers. And I think that that's problematic, and that's the beginning of where my work begins, from the understanding that there's always loads going on there, and there's always loads of people with loads of interesting things happening, and it's just that people are misinterpreting them by often using a white, privileged, middle class lens. And so that I try and flip that.
David, is that obviously because Stephen's been working with my ex-mining villages?
Yeah.
Obviously, you David have been working up in Upper Weardale,
Yes.
again, which is a slightly different context, but again is considered to be hard to reach from a policymaker's point of view. Again, if you have misgivings, how do they play out in your mind and your work?
Well, the big misgivings I have with all these things is they don't mean anything. You can actually have a phrase, the hard to reach, right? Now, I can use that in Upper Weardale because quite simply, it is hard to reach. Try and get a bus in Upper Weardale. But whether you try and drive a car up there, so in hard to reach there, it becomes a topographical thing. And you have to begin to think about what's the terms of this? What do you mean? So, picking up Stephen's point, just take hard to reach, throw it about, but nobody really looks at the consequences of that term, how people are going to interpret it, how it makes people feel. What does it mean in terms of what you're going to do, what your approach is? And I sort of agree that we tend to parachute things in, as if this is good for you. Now, in some ways, I'd go, there's a worthiness about it, and I think there's a good intention there. But what actually happens is that we don't go in and do the most important thing, and none of the policymakers do this, is go in and talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
Just have conversations, right? And when you have conversations, you find out things about how people, think, their perspectives on things, their differences, the richness, the multi-layered natures of a community, the fears, the hopes, all these things, which quite often will surprise you, right, if you're willing to listen and engage. And one of the things comes from, I would draw something from my past, because when I was an actor, and
I did a lot of rural touring, right? And one of the things you notice immediately, and it's the right place for rural touring as well. You know, people go, it's a play, and, you know, sort of it could go here, there, and everywhere. And you think, no, what you have to understand is the nature of the rural community, the nature of the village hall, the nature of the church hall, in terms of where it is, what it does, what its function is. So you take a play in which serves certain things, one which has to appeal to everybody in the community, because you can't put an under 14s, because there's babysitting problems. It can't go on too long because there's a bus sometimes to get back, and they're farming communities and have to be up early. You have to have basically 45 minutes, 50 minutes first act, 25 minutes for the raffle, for cups of tea and the raffle.
Yeah.
That makes, if you go with a certain play, right, which does not recognise that cultural tradition and those timetables, those social timetables, the theatre company who goes in will go, oh, we've wasted time taking anything there. I didn't like it, didn't want it. And I'm thinking, what you haven't done is you haven't gone halfway, had the conversations, understood the lives of people, the rhythm, you know, the intentions, the day to day. So I think, fine to start off a conversation, hard to reach, but bloody well define it. You know, don't just slap these phrases around because they don't mean anything. They do a disservice to the people we work with and to ourselves and to the nature of our work. And consequently, I can understand, you know, sort of why in certain places, you know, sort of you go and think, oh, bloody hell, here comes the artist.
Exactly.
Here comes the artist dispensing culture and goodwill. You know, let us all give praise and thankfulness.
Well, that's great. And what this all kind of makes me think of is that actually the people who are hard to reach are the people who are drafting the policy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Good point, Ewan.
And I think, Ewan, as well, it's interesting to flip this, as I like to do, and think about, you're right, it is the hard to reach, because they represent a very small proportion of the population. They're difficult to reach, according to statistics, by policymakers themselves.
Yeah.
You know, the culturally voracious, as they're classified, must be the easy to reach. So what is it about being easy to reach? What does easy to reach make? If difficult to reach is this, what is easy to reach? And I don't think that's often defined, because when you do that, you start to see the class-based, privileged base that actually means in terms of arts and culture. And I think that's something that it's interesting to flip that and see that what we're talking about here is a misnomer, effectively.
And I think what we have at Northern Heartlands, and in our founding vision, what we took it upon ourselves to do was to actually take the sentiment, the expertise, the knowledge that exists at a local level across a county like County Durham, or any county that you want to take that is considered to be slightly off the map from a policymaker's point of view, and communicate that expertise, that worth upwards, so that, you know, it's difficult for these communities to advocate for themselves. And I think that's where a project, you know, that's where artists can actually come in. You've got to get the community behind you before you start doing that. But I do think that's, you know, in terms of the Great Place scheme and how it saw the role of the arts, I thought it was genuinely actually quite an interesting new narrative within justifying spending on the arts. That it was a way of actually, you could capture grassroots expertise and run it up through the lens of the arts into a world where the easy to reach might take note. and build some of those bridges that are currently down.
Yeah, it is very much about amplifying people's voices, and all too often, I'm sure, David, you're the same, that I hear when you do talk to people and you go to pubs and clubs and all the rest of it and meet people in the street and just chat and get on with people and you know, and listen to all the really, really amazing stories of everyday life, then what you see is people who far too often say they've got loads of ideas, and they often, all the time, I hear them saying, nobody ever listens to me. Nobody ever listens to me, and they never do anything that we want around here. And so I guess what I'm interested in is saying, okay, so what do you want? And how can we use arts, heritage, culture, etc., to help you begin to at least get that, begin to be listened to, and begin not just to be listened to, but acted for on behalf, so that they're listening and then doing what these people want. And I think that for me is a crucial role in what I try and do, really, that sort of mediation thing between these people who don't listen and don't ever want to go there and class these people as being difficult to reach, and people saying, look, nobody ever listens to us. And it's often people find that sort of, the people higher up are actually amazed at the ideas that people have, which is silly, because of course everyone has great ideas. But you know, and it's about making people aware and trying to somehow say, okay, how can we bridge this, like you say, Ewan?
So I'm interested from both of you, I suppose, to get into some nitty gritty. What are your qualities as individuals and artists that have made it possible for you to gain the confidence of people to do that amplification process? And what are some actual examples of you each doing that? David, can we hear from you first, if you'd be willing to offer up some self-analysis?
If it's essentially sort of what qualities one has, that's always a difficult thing to answer, because it's other people that decide what qualities you have. I suppose the thing for me is looking at what I think works and the particular things. One is I'm probably good at having conversations, right, and walking around, right, and listening. And I also think questioning and actually go against some of the assumptions. I'll give you an example. This is not from Northern Heartlands, it's from another project I worked in at County Durham Town, where I was told that the thing that happened was that all the youth gathered at the bus station every Friday night, right? And it was the place of, terror for local people, And admittedly, at one point, there had been a little bit of a disturbance. So I thought, right, I'm just going up, and I caught the bus. So I love going by buses because you get to talk to people, So I go and buy a bus, and I get up there, and I go to the bus station looking for the feral youth rampaging. Funny enough, they weren't there. I go the second week, a different time, no one there. I go the third week, no one there. I see two kids riding their bike. I say, excuse me, have you got a minute? And I said, yeah. I said, look, I'm just doing some stuff around here. I hear things about people. I said, no, now and again we do, but not that often. Now, you talked there, and there was a perception, but there was another perception elsewhere. Now, I think the key job is, if you're working in a place, is to unpick those perceptions, right? And think what the value is of the story you've heard. The story about the bus station is not a story about youth and that, or it's a story about, you know, a disenfranchisement, if you like, but also a perception of space, a perception of where it's dangerous by certain people, you know. So what we tend to do is, you know, is that going in and making those assumptions. So I think probably what I do is I walk around a lot, I drink beer, I have cups of tea, I stand on corners and have a smoke, I talk to people in markets, I stop people in the street and just chat to them. I never write down what they say when I'm talking to them. I remember it and then shoot away somewhere and just make the quick notes. And what you're trying to do is just get under the skin. And if they think, the final point is, one of the things that happens with certain people, I don't know whether you found this, is certain places when you do that, people are actually very kind. And quite often they want to tell you the story they think you want to hear. You know, and so you have to go beyond that. Does that make sense?
Mm.
It does, and again, this brings us to some of the kind of thinking within Northern Heartlands, and the reason that we got Visit County Durham to be the lead partner in it was this idea that actually, what an attractive place to visit constitutes is a place that has confidence in itself. You know, that it doesn't need a visitor centre, it doesn't need tourist infrastructure. It needs to be proud of itself and confident, and that makes it an attractive place to go. And that's, I think that's precisely, you know, there's this underneath everywhere. Everyone's proud of the place they live.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
You know, it's so often, you know, people, when you come to a new community, what they want to tell you is all the stuff that they're proud of about that place in particular. Stephen, your because you know the villages that you've been working with
Mm-hmm.
have really particular issues around having been stigmatized now for several generations, which is a real thing it's a weight on the shoulders of the community to have that, you know, even by local authority, to be seen to be maybe not viable.
Yeah.
So how do you go about turning that around?
Firstly, I would say that I'd just like to say, listening to David there, David, ditto, mate. That's exactly what I do too. And yeah, it's a practice that's too often forgotten nowadays by these so-called socially engaged artists and people like that. You know, the basics of just going and having a drink, getting in, just meeting people. Do you know what I mean? And like you say, standing there having a smoke. I do all those things, everything. It just echoed completely with what I try and do too, mate. So yeah. Spot on. We do exactly the same thing, I think, in that way, in that sense. In terms of like the communities of Dean Valley and Eldon, where I've been working for quite a long time now, several years, they have been stigmatized with Category D. And Category D designation was many pit villages in Durham were designated as Category D, which basically meant no investment and actually demolition in many cases. Ideally, the idea being to close the villages down, wipe them off the map and move everybody to new towns. And it didn't work. Most of them, there was various degrees of demolition. So the people of Dean Valley and Eldon, and themselves a whole group of smallish villages and hamlets, who had between them very complex relationships and animosities, which go back a very long time and to do with the different pits that were in the area and all the rest of it. But also there's and so they found themselves unable to really communicate with each other. And there was this, and this was like David said, this was one of the myths that we got, which was these places don't, like, people don't get on, right? Dean Valley and Eldon, the tiny communities, yet nobody goes there. Nobody. And so the first thing I was to find out that they did, and that people did communicate and did get on and did go out with each other, and they got married. And I began by going to the graveyard and suggesting, how come everybody's buried in the same place? And then we began these talks around the schools and everything else. And actually, the fact is, there's a small number of people perpetuate this myth, right? Because of they're holding these long-term axes that no one ever comes together in the village. So it was about, for me, okay, how can people come together? How can we? And one of the things that was common was this sense of pride and this sense of oppression that was caused by Category D, and how they had stayed, and how they had weathered the demolitions, but remembered the streets that were gone. The streets, interestingly, there's like many of the streets and areas that have been knocked down have never been developed. They're just left. In many cases, you can still see the streets. So you can still, they're still there. They're still on Google Maps, and they're still named on Google Maps. This is the weird thing. So there's this there's both a sense of having moved on from that, but also the legacy is there, staring them smack bang in the face. The classic area of the Hollow, which is known because it's hollow land, but also because it's a piece of ground that was hollowed out, a piece of the community that's been hollowed out. And so I worked on that piece of land, and I'm interested and work with young people who themselves were stigmatized by certain older members of the community as being really naughty. And yeah, they do some naughty stuff, but you know what? Within not long, I was giving them film cameras, and they were going off with it, and everyone was like, they'll steal the camera. They didn't steal the camera. They made really good stuff, right? They said, and in the end, one of the things that I was shocked at was we spent hours in a tent that I set up on the Hollow with big groups of teenagers who wanted to come back. And I was like, right, let's do some cool art. Let's do this cool lomography and all the rest of it. And they were like, we want to do watercolors. And we want to teach us how to do watercolors. And that's the last thing that I normally do, but I did it. And they were doing beautiful watercolors of fags, right? Cigarettes and that, right? And all this. But they were beautiful, and they really wanted to do that. Then it was only COVID-19 that cut that short. And I think that it's about, like, as you say, David, responding in the way that, like, it's all I do is go to an area not knowing, and I don't know the people, and I don't know anything about it, and I want to find out all about it. And then I want to do what they want to do. Right, I don't want to tell them what to do. I want to go, okay, what you want, like, and then help that happen. So that's how I get around. That's how I get on and make my way into communities as the visitor and an outsider. It's about being welcomed and invited into communities and into homes.
If I could just say something, exactly right, Stephen. One of the things I did up in Upper Weird, I was asking people to take me for a walk.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Just walk me around, show me what you see, not what tell me what other things that the areas you like, what you don't like. Tell me the observations, the thoughts. And the other thing I do, because I'm a writer, is I tend not to ask for stories. I ask for perceptions. How does this make you feel? Right? When you're walking down here and such happens, do you feel, just tell me how you feel. Also, ask questions like, you wake up in the morning, well, what's the first thing you see? What are your thoughts? I'm just trying to get inside of how they see the world, and let them show me the world as they see it, not as I see it, and not as policy funders and NGOs or whatever see it, but tell me as you see it.
Beautiful.
One thing I'm curious about that I wanted to bring up as well, which I think is significant between the three of us, is accent.
Yeah.
Accent, yeah.
Just the fact that each of us has an accent make a difference in these settings.
Yes.
I can't answer that. I don't know.
I think it does to some extent, and I think it's a difficult subject to broach, but certainly,
yeah.
There's Britain's uniquely class driven,
Mm-hmm.
and quite tribal as well. You know, there's the amount of different accents
Yeah.
in the UK. Compare that internationally, I think it's quite exceptional.
It is. Mind you, I quite often go talking like that, you know, sort of I just go up and say, hello, how are you today? What would we like to do? Shall we have a cup of tea and let us talk about art? I know what you mean, you. And I think one of the things is that I'm just reading a book which I found quite captivating, which reflects on what you've just said.
Where are you from, David? Is that a Yorkshire accent?
No, I'm from Birmingham originally.
Oh, you?
Yes, but then I was brought up in the Rhondda Valley in South Wales, see. Down there. You know, I mean, I've lived up here for 30 years, mind.
Right.
But then I go down to Yorkshire. I'll go anywhere, mate. I don't care. No, I think I've just been reading a book called Imagined Communities by a historian called Benedict Anderson. And one of the things he talks about is language and accent, and how a lot of the communities we associate with are products of our imagination, right? And what is it that brings the community together? And it's a sense of you know, it can be defined by space, but it can be defined by the language we use, the accents we use, the phraseology we use. And so when we talk about, quite often, going into a community, right, that community might not be what we think it is. It might be subdivided into a number of communities, and there might be people there who like where they live, but they feel a community with people of shared ideas or outlook, which are not always the same people within that particular community. Does that make sense? That we're constantly searching for a community, but creating one using a variety of things, from the things we read, the things we talk about, how we talk, right? How we move around through space, you know. And I think we sometimes policy makers and that don't quite get that we're not necessarily as homogenous as we like to think we are. Right? Or is that we imagine that there are so many layers and so many nuances, right? And you go to a place and you look at it and it becomes like a village, pit village. I mean, I live in an old pit village, right? You go in there and people come in, it's a pit village. Well, old pit village it is, but the variety of communities which operate within that.
And the fishers that you these places have fishers. You know,
yes.
They have quite stark fishers sometimes.
Absolutely.
Steve, your accent, how did your accent play out in Eldon and Dean villages? Because obviously you have a northeast accent, but not a County Durham accent.
Oh, so people. I mean, for me, I think maybe it's, I don't know. Maybe it's my accent. Maybe. But no matter where I go, whether it's Scotland, Cumbria, Durham, Wales, whatever, London, with work that I've done with activism, people always like get on all right with me, and I think that maybe the accent, as you perhaps indicated before a little bit, Ewan, has something to do with a marker of class in some people's eyes, and that it's also a conversation starter. So people always say, "Oh," and they did in Dean Valley, but they do elsewhere around the country further afield. "Oh, are you a Geordie? Are you?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So, you know, and this is something that people warm to, and conversely, because I'm an academic as well, that is something that many people find really troubling. And the amount of times that I've actually, you know, I write, and hopefully I write quite eloquently, and people then, you know, get me to come down and do a lecture or a keynote, and they'll say, shaking my hand, "Oh, Stephen, it's really surprising to hear your accent. You're not how I imagined from your writing." And I'm like, "Why is that?" "Because I'm like a Geordie, and when I write, it comes across as..." And so they find that a little bit troubling. So I think in terms of Dean Valley and Eldon, though, I think that it was fine, and I think that the accent helps. I think certainly they're very wary of posh people, right? There's definitely a feeling about being wary of, but also once they're in the company of posh people, being quite deferential towards them. This working class deference, you know, the doffing of the cap, which I think is, again, deeply problematic and something I encourage them to basically stick two fingers up at. Do you know what I mean? And so I think that there has to be that sense of irreverence as well about how we practice. And it's about, as well, this idea about people saying, you know, that if you look at these toolkits, how to go into a hard-to-reach community, and, you know, risk and safeguarding and all the rest of it, and you should not, and well, if you're going to work in places like this, right, you've got to be like down, you've got to like let as much of that go as you possibly can. Do you know what I mean? And the stories that you hear, I hear people say, "Yeah, we torched that house," right? I'm not going to say who that was. I'm not going to say, right, because that was given in confidence at the moment. Right, and that's about building that, and that's part of the community. That's not for me to become a policeman, right, or anything like that. I'm hearing this as just another part of everyday life, and I think it's by building trust. So I don't tell on anyone, and that enables people to really trust me, you know, and but you've got to be careful about how that plays out via social media, whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? You've got to watch that because they watch, and I don't want to be seen to be exploitative. And there's often a very, very fine line that we all, I think, need to check ourselves on quite a lot, because it's easy to go, "Wow, that's an amazing story," and then actually there can be slightly a bit naughty, do you know, to tell it. Yeah.
David, you wanted to come in there?
Yeah, it's also a question to you, Ewan, as well, which was accent's one thing, but there's also, I think, vocabulary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I know that you Ewan, have a background as a philosopher, you know, and you have that philosophical training, and you know the terminologies. But did you, you know, do you, when you're dry stone walling and we're talking to the farmers and that, are your conversations concerning phenomenology or the categorical imperative or anything like that, you know? And
well, I'll tell you, it's interesting.
Language,
yeah,
words we use.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's interesting because that's, in a way, that was the premise for my project, Hefted to Hill, was that in my experience, dry stone walling, and the fact that farmers do like, when they're passing, to stop and spend some time.
Yes, absolutely.
Is I'm always interested to get them on to subject matter that they might not ordinarily get onto.
Yeah, yeah. But it's which words you would use to get them onto that.
Yeah.
How that conversation is structured.
Yeah, words in common parlance. I certainly don't go academic, because there's
no. I didn't. Now, you would. I'm going to straight to point.
Turning to academia, I'm dead set on writing in a way that the farmers about who I'm writing,
brilliant,
can follow that and can follow that argument, because you don't need to patronize people. You don't need to talk down. It's not even about. It's finding the right temper, to use a stone tool kind of analogy.
It's like people in all the communities I worked in are easily quite capable of following and enjoy following what we might call complex ideas and arguments and things through, and look at things all the time. But they won't necessarily use the language which is associated with a particular discipline. You know, whether it's a historian of ideas, or a sociologist, or a ethnographer, or something like that, right? But what they're doing is they're engaged. People will, and like you're saying about farmers, the one thing I do find is that people do like to engage in discussion and debate, you know, and want to pursue an idea, and want to question it and challenge it and raise all these things.
Yeah, and I think that's a great untapped potential in the nation, is all this actual, this to use awful treasury terminology, the intellectual capital that exists at a local level.
Yes.
Which could be the basis of community resilience, isn't properly getting wielded in a way that could be making the difference, that would make a difference.
Yes.
I wanted to come back to your point, Stephen. You were talking about the how trust is something that needs to be on a daily basis tended to.
Yeah. Because
you break it the once, you've broken it for good.
Yeah, totally.
And I certainly felt that with my farmers, is that they were sharing a lot of confidences with me because I had won their trust. And I should point out, for those who aren't familiar with the project, one of the ways in which I won trust was I, in terms of recruiting the 7 farmers who I had these built in-depth relationships with, I gave each of them, and this was the deal, they each got 2 days of free dry stone walling, paid for by Northern Ireland. And that set up a relationship in which I made them indebted to me.
Yeah. But and I think one of the key things about trust there is there's trust in the confidence they display, the conversations you have, and honouring those disclosures and in those conversations. But it's also sometimes quite a simple thing, is you have promised 2 days worth dry stone walling next Wednesday and Thursday, and next Wednesday and Thursday you turn up and do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were promised to be there and you are there. You know, and I think sometimes we forget the importance of that. If you say you're going to do something, do it.
Yeah, you know, however small. Yeah. Yeah, and you know, this trust thing, it's interesting at the moment. Within this hard to reach term, I've actually, it's come up in a farming context at the moment. The post-Brexit settlement for farming and public money going into farming is going to be going through a thing called ELMS, Environmental Land Management Contracts. And it's this new formula of public money for public goods. And a big study's just come out of the University of Sheffield around hard to reach farmers. And the likelihood that there's a lot of farmers actually not going to engage with this, either because they've had bad experiences with you know, payment systems before, that they don't trust authority, that they're too busy, and there's all this, you know, so it's a real, it's a potential moment of crisis because of the anticipation that there's a lot of farmers who are hard to reach because of various historical reasons.
Yeah.
So it is, you know, it's interesting to see that this idea of the hard to reach does have quite a lot of significance.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Within the post-Brexit context. particularly it was supposed to be about taking back control. You know, I mean, somewhere like County Durham, which was strongly Brexit, or Brexit, it was about this sense of distance from hard to reach policymakers.
Yeah,
that was
absolutely,
a way, wasn't
it? And I think that the thing is that the term hard to reach, again, and talking in the context of trust, the problem that we have is that in the case that you've just described of the farmers there, they're having stuff done to them, right, from above, right, without necessarily being consulted enough or at all, right? And the reason I believe the reason for that, and it's the same within communities in Eldon and Dean Valley, for example, and many others, that people do stuff to them. What that's about is it's about that they have a mistrust of people's ability to decide on their own what they need, and that prevents them from listening to them. So they mistrust people. They want to police them. They want to segregate these areas. They want to stigmatize them and all the rest of it. On the contrary, the people who live there distrust authority. And there's an important difference between mistrust, i.e. getting something wrong, wrongly thinking that you shouldn't trust someone, and distrust, rightly knowing that you shouldn't trust someone because of experience. And there's more than enough evidence of like the fact that the people of Dean Valley and Eldon have every right to distrust authority because of what they've done to them and continue to do to them. So when you see, like in the community I'm going to today, right, I've been working with this community, and my position on Brexit is I'm quite strongly pro-European. The people I'm working with are very, very anti-European. They have issues about immigration and migration. They support, some people in the community support far right positions. And I sometimes talk to my artist colleagues and they say to me, Stephen, you shouldn't be working with people like that. And I'm like, no. Do you know what? They're the very people that we need to be working with, right? It's difficult, and I'm taking a load of plants down and all the rest of it. And do you know what? They're lovely people, and the behind all this is a massive distrust, right, of the entire system. The outcome that they have is a bit weird. They've got their own position, which is, you know, they've bought into this position, the popular right-wing position on how to deal with this, right? But that's because people have left them for far too long. And actually, they're lovely people that want the best for that community. And I think there's this real issue around that.
You're right, Stephen. It is so much distrust. Mm-hmm. You know, actually, I don't trust anyone else as far as I can throw them. And there's a sort of a bringing going into themselves, mm-hmm. because they're the only ones they can trust, and to counter what they feel threatened by, mm-hmm. right? And there's a lot of threat going on, mm-hmm. and that's not threat from them to me. Mm-hmm. That's the perception, the feeling of, you know, we've constantly been threatened by, whether it's, you know, the government, immigration, whatever. Europe does this, and they're going to searching for that understanding of blame and how they can have what you call the resilience to be themselves.
But nonetheless, there's still a very strong sense of community. Do you know what I mean? So there's still this sense of strong sense of it doesn't take much to organise the community for them to organise themselves and to help each other out and to want to do stuff. And we've begun community garden. These people are from all different backgrounds. Are making community gardens on empty bits of land and trying to do up the area. They're trying because they want to meet new people. They want to talk to people. They want to help people. Help them. You know, they're helping them right now. Go to the shops. They're helping them. Yet at the same time, that they have. So it's not like an either or. There's this you know, the really, yeah, it's complicated and complex. And I find that really, it's a great privilege really to be, and I understand my privilege. So it's a great privilege to be in a position to be able to be accepted and to be able to take part in parts of their everyday lives, and have these robust discussions, like you say, David, you know, and just get on. But you have to get on, do you know what I mean? And I think that there's, again, it comes back to this difficult to reach thing, doesn't it? And it's oh, those people are like that, you shouldn't have anything to do with them. It's like, hold on a minute, you know what I mean? And this is a middle class art world privileged position. And I'm sorry, but like when I grew up in Jarrow, it was normal. I argued with people about racism and sexism and gender and everything all my life. But I think we understand that, and maybe if you come from a middle class perspective, maybe you find this, oh my God, well, I'm sorry, but that's just like everyday life for most people in this country. Do you know what I mean?
David, you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've also illustrated a little point about community and definitions of community. I don't think a community is a static thing.
No.
You know, and it goes back to those various layers of it. For example, two instances, if you like. One is I was at something called the Eastgate Sheep Show, which was fantastic. You know, so when I was talking to various people there, and one of I talked to this young lass in the early 20s, who was one of the judges, you know, sort of the the livestock and the beasts. And, you know, when she broke, I said, could I have a chat? We had a chat. And she was from Hexham.
Mm.
Right. So I said, oh, you come. She said, yeah, I'm often over here. And so I said, well, you know, sort of brought up as a farmer and, you know, sort of farmer's daughter. And I'm going on the farm now as a shepherd, you know, working with the family and that. So I said, so tell me about your social life, you know, what it is. And she said, it's interesting, my social life is with other farmers. Right? And the reason for that is we understand the rhythms of each other's lives. We have a shared common problem, which was the Brexit stuff coming in and the implications of it. So she said, you know, sort of, I'll live over there, but I will drive over the dales, over the tops. You know, because her community was the other farmers in the area of her age group or above.
Let's bring it back to a kind of meta level question of cultural policy and cultural spending.
Yes.
You've got within that cultural policy pot, you've got a hugely embedded lobby in London that has a certain view of what state funding for the arts constitutes.
Mm-hmm.
What, on the strength of the work that each of you has done and the work that Northern Heartlands as a whole has done, what arguments would you make? There's this big levelling up agenda, supposedly, that the government has aligned itself to. What, in each of your views, is a levelling up process, and how does that get put into an Excel spreadsheet with respect to spending priorities? Is that possible to answer?
For me, I'm a co-organizer of something called the Movement for Cultural Democracy, and we are a group of artists, cultural workers, academics, people of all backgrounds, arts professionals, directors of museums. And what we believe in is that a complete redistribution of arts and cultural funding, along with a redefinition of what art and culture is, to accept that there is no culture, there are numerous cultures, and there are many, many forms of artistic practices. An example, the other day, seeing a report that suggested that people were low cultural measuring and cultural engagement, and it pointed out about singing, and then it actually said not karaoke. and it, like, they felt the need to point this out, and so for me, you know, what I'm interested in is an understanding of all of our cultural practices and lives, right? Culture as everyday life and ordinary in all its extremes, from high art to people crafting to people building stone walls and everything, all cultural practices, yeah. And I'm interested in understanding why some things are funded, and why other things are not just unfunded, but have systematically been defunded recently. All the village halls, all the places where the Andram used to happen, the choirs, everything, all the centres, loads of them have gone. There's nowhere for people to even gather often. And so for me, I'm interested in, along with the movement, of it beginning by looking at a two-tier system, a little bit like Sport England and Sport UK. And the idea being around one being for the elite, which could be Arts Council England and that sort of thing, for for higher art portfolio of excellence, and then all national lottery spend plus perhaps other money being allocated in a way that's weighted against lottery spend in communities, and enabling people to decide what cultural activities they would like to fund and support within their own communities. And I think that would be a major shift. It's obviously threatening to so many people, but it's possible to do that in a structured way. And for me, without that, then you've got round the difficult to reach, because these people are deciding for themselves. Yeah. And so for me, that's something that's really important. So I'm not suggesting that we should burn down the massive glass citadels and beautiful ornate buildings. But what I'm saying is we must look at stopping getting these people from these citadels to do outreach, and instead let people make their own art and culture their own way, and invite us to be part of that process rather than the other way around.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting.
David, do you have do you concur? And
yeah, I find that very, very interesting. That, you know, sort of, because one of the things that one definition of simple definition of culture is simply it's the way we do things round here. Mm-hmm. You know, that's how we are. That's how we do. So the first thing we have to do when we're levelling up or targeting any funding or whatever is first of all understand, when you're going somewhere, is understand of that community, of that place. And let's talk about it in a locality rather than a community of philosophical or an emotional community, but defined by location. The first thing you have to do is find out what it is they do, the way they do things. Yeah, this is the way we are. So we like karaoke, but we also like opera. Yeah, I love a bit of Shakespeare, right? But I like to play darts, right? And it's finding the way we do things around here then allows arts practice, which can then be effective. And if it's effective in this area of changing perception, I think one of the key things is change perceptions of who we are, what we're capable of, and what our places are like, and things like that. That's important. But the one thing that always worries me about when these phrases like levelling up come and anything like that is the recognition that change does take time, right? And quite often arts projects which are, sort of like, let's go back to the phrase hard to reach communities, things like that, whatever troublesome phrase as it is, go back to that, there's never enough. The expectation is you go in, you do this, and everything will change. Right? No, it doesn't work like that. Nothing works like that. We're not talking about key performance indicators or doing it all in 3 months or anything like that. We're talking on huge changes in perceptions of who we are. Where are we going? What are our values? What are the beliefs? And perhaps essentially, to use a sort of Socratic view of it, is how can we be happy?
Nice.
You know, sort of how can we live a good life, a happy life, in which all of us feel safe and whatever.
Lovely.
All right, guys. Well, we've covered a nice spectrum there of stuff that I think is very pertinent around cultural policy making at the moment, around this idea of the hard to reach. So Stephen Pritchard, David Napthine, thanks both very much, and thanks for contributing so much to the traction that Northern Heartlands has been, I genuinely think, has been able to have in its short amount of time in a hard to reach part of the world.
Thanks,
No,
David.
thank you.
Thanks, Ewan. Yeah, thanks. Nice chatting, David, as well, mate.
Yeah, nice, Stephen.
Aye, nice one.
Great. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
Thank you.